say in your mind, say to yourself, I am more than my physical body. Because I am more than physical matter, I can perceive that which is greater than the physical world. I deeply desire to expand, to experience, to know, to understand, to control, to use such greater energies and energy systems as may be beneficial and constructive to me and to those who follow me. I deeply desire the help and cooperation, the assistance, the understanding of those individuals whose wisdom, development, and experience are equal to or greater than my own. I ask their guidance and protection from any influence or any source that might provide me with less than my stated desires.
Do not know all the answers to the questions about reality. Do not claim to know the ultimate truth about life. I seek that which has been made hidden. As a part of a family of explorers of consciousness, I'm the void one.
Welcome to Lighting the Void.
All broadcasting live from a shack on a hill in the Mossy Creek bottoms of Cane Creek, Arkansas. This is Lighting the Void, live here on the Fringe FM, KTLK Digital Broadcasting, also live on YouTube and Twitch. You know, the video thing is still practically new to us. Tonight, Jason Quitt is on the program. We're going to be talking about his new book, Gates of the Anunnaki. This one's going to get deep, folks, so you better strap in, all right? If we open the phone lines up, when we open the phone lines up, it's 501-777-5631. I want to thank Tom A. for downloading Tom just jumped in the store and downloaded all of the audio-guided meditations and everything that we offer there in the shop, which I thought was pretty damn cool, and I don't think anybody's done that. He just downloaded everything. And then a couple of people asked about the Tattwa cards, the meditative Tattwa cards still. Just go to fringe.fm/shop or click on the store. They're there. They're UV protected. They come in a nice little box. And soon, I would say within the next 60 days, the other elemental guided meditative audio releases are going to be for those things. And this shit's going to get, pardon my French, but it's going to get trippy because we're going to go through it one element at a time as we scry through these cards and see what happens. And then we're going to have some conversations about them. All right. So just go to the Fringe FM and grab those there. We're going to jump right into this with Jason Quitt, who is here with us today, an author, a speaker, well known in this community. I've been talking to him for years now on the show, and I remember grabbing his first book that I read, which was Forbidden Knowledge, which blew my socks off because I was an out-of-body guy. And now we have moved on from that to Egyptian Postures of Power, Astral Genesis, and now the Gates of the Anunnaki. Jason's here with us. Thanks for coming on the program, brother. It's good to have you.
It's good to be back.
It's good to have you, man. I don't have this book yet, but I'm grabbing this book. I don't have it yet. I've watched a lot of your interviews. I'm stoked about it. How did we go from Astral Genesis to this thing, man?
Well, that is the question. And the truth is, it has to do with the process of writing. And basically, I kind of go in a direction and I just let it lead me completely. So, for example, I was writing the Egyptian Postures second book, which is the Salute to the Moon. So I was going into the different moon gods from different cultures and just kind of reading these ancient texts. And one of the earliest moon gods there was that we know about, it's a Sumerian moon god named Nana. And it's one of the earliest versions of the motif of a moon god. Many people know him by his Sumerian name, which is the god Sin. But when you go back in time, Nana was basically a herdsman, the shepherd. His image was the bull's horn, the crescent moon. So you have all these various symbols and stories that predate even the Egyptian gods. Now, with the Sumerian god Nana as the moon, what made him very interesting to me was that he was the father of the sun god. So in the creation stories of the Sumerians, the moon god actually had more authority and more power than Utu, who was the sun god. It was actually his son is the sun god. So I was reading this text from a tablet called The Herds of Nana. And basically this ancient tablet, which we really don't know how old these stories really are. We just know from the fragments and the tablets that we find and are dated. And they're usually, the earliest are from the 4th and 3rd millennia. So we're going back like almost 5,000 years, 4,000 or 5,000 years. And in this text, it talks about Nana, the god in heaven. And basically it talks about his stables, his temples in heaven, and how many cows he keeps in each of these stables. So it's a very strange story.
Yeah. Sounds like a nursery rhyme almost, right? Yeah. Right.
And he divides these cattle from bulls to cows to young to old to different colors, which ones to eat, which ones not to eat. And he numbers all of these. And I'm looking at these numbers that he's putting to these cows, and these are huge numbers, like 180,000 of this type, and 50,400 of this type. So it's like there's all these variations. And I'm looking at these numbers, and I go, these numbers are very specific, and I've seen them before. They're not random numbers. And, going back into ancient texts, most of the works are allegorical and symbolic.
Yeah.
So even though they're saying one thing to the story or telling a story in one way, they're putting information within the story that, if you understand what that information is, it changes the story completely.
Sure, yeah.
So that was kind of the first key that got me interested in writing this book. And I said, I've seen these numbers before. I've written about these numbers before. I know what they are. Let me see if I can find them in other ancient Sumerian tablets. And sure enough, I started to find this number code within the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is my favorite story, the Descent of Inanna, and the Sumerian Kings List. So this is very interesting because when we're looking at these ancient gods, what we're seeing is that many people think that the Sumerian Kings List talks about a number of kings and kingdoms that existed pre-flood that went back in time 240,000 years. All right, so this is a huge number that many researchers, especially with the ancient alien background, they'll look at these numbers and say, okay, this proves the ancient gods. It proves, the ancient alien theory about these gods living thousands and thousands of years pre the flood. And it confirms what the Bible says because it's written way before the Bible. And I'm looking at this and I'm seeing a number code, because some of these kings, they lived, let's say, one king, for example, lived 43,200 years.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. There's something hidden there, obviously, right?
And, we know these numbers, 432, right? Like 432 hertz. So this king is 43,200 years. And so I started looking at these numbers and I said, okay, let me add them up. This kingdom, there was 2 kings. Let's add those numbers together. How many years did those kings live? And I just kind of did that with the different kings and the different kingdoms. And you get this sequence of numbers. And it's the same sequence of numbers we find in other stories and in other places. And it even goes into biblical texts thousands of years in the future. So I pose the question is, why are these numbers put in these stories? And why are they continually repeated over the span of thousands of years, but with the same type of context to them? And it opens up this huge question about the Sumerians and how they basically dissected reality using numbers. And we still use the Sumerian systems of numbers today. The degrees of a circle, 360 degrees. We got that from the Sumerians. The divisions of the heavens into 12 constellations of 30 degrees. We got that from the Sumerians. So all these numbers of cycles of time, space, and dimensions were first put forth by these early Sumerians. And it's not really explained how or why, or the spiritual or the metaphysical or even the mystical aspects of why these numbers are important and why they were so important that we have thousands of years of history of them repeating these numbers over and over again and passing them down through various stories and sacred texts. So this is what led me to write the book, The Gates of the Anunnaki. And it completely changed my view of the ancient gods, of the ancient Anunnaki. And it put them in a completely different light. I grew up, obviously, reading Zecharia Sitchin.
Oh, yeah. It's one of my faves, man. Everybody loves that, right?
And so you have that kind of vision of, these ancient gods creating mankind and, all those epics and stories and science and all these things. Reading them again today after all these years, I got a completely different perspective, completely different view. And I stopped seeing them as these physical beings walking the earth or coming from heaven down to earth. I started to see them as hierarchies or levels of creation. So the basically primeval forces of nature, just like the Egyptian Neteru and the Egyptian gods, each god basically represented an element. They represented a planet. They represented a cycle of life, a season, and their stories basically were created to personify a god at that hierarchy of creation. So it was a completely different, I would say a complete opposite interpretation of Zecharia Sitchin, where these aren't physical beings, editing our DNA and flying from planet Nibiru to Earth to mine gold. These were stories used to convey a very deeper or a very deep metaphysical or mystical concept of their view of reality.
Do you get that they did that on purpose? So
absolutely.
that it would stand the test of time or something like that?
Absolutely. And the more that you study ancient texts, especially Egyptian and Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian, you'll start to see that storytelling is very important. And they try to make it as simple as possible. And they use various motifs and themes to keep it memorable, to be passed down word of mouth for thousands of years. And, you know, we still have them today because of that, and writing down on tablets, obviously. But it's what they're even using in biblical texts that we have today, and storytelling that we tell children. The easier it is to remember, the easier it is to be passed down.
Right. Yeah, like the parables and stuff, pretty much. You know, like I was raised on the Bible, and obviously the questions of it wasn't really stitching. I found stitching later, but the questions of the Bible are what got my attention. You know, the visions of Ezekiel and things like that. It just didn't make sense, right? And so it goes from not making sense to people saying it's spaceships, and then you look deeper and you're like, well, these are astrological points of the zodiac, right? It's even deeper than that. And I think that's what you're trying to show people in this book, right? It's deeper than the stories, than our religion, even the astrology, right?
Yes. They're very complicated stories. And I think it's absolutely genius that they kind of interwoven that very complicated understandings into simplistic stories. So like what you just said with Ezekiel and the four angels, or the four cherubs, or the four animals, which is the lion, the bull, the eagle, and the man, which is the cardinal cross of the zodiac, or the solar cross, as we can call it, which basically is the movement of the sun through the constellations. Mm. And when they say it's a wheel within a wheel, this is a very well-known concept of like the cosmic clock of the zodiac. And the amazing thing is that goes back to Egypt, and you'll find stories with the same thing, and that will go back even to Sumeria. So it's a very ancient understanding that's continually passed down. And when you start to go into these stories in this book, what I did is I actually did break it down astrologically as well. Okay. And showed parallels in comparison to biblical texts or Roman or Greek texts of the gods, because they're repeated over and over again. Even though the characters' names may change and the storylines may change, it's still the exact same knowledge that's being passed down.
Wow. So what does it come down to then, right? Because what I started getting from all of your work, I'm glad that you keep writing, man, because I think that you're helping people expand their consciousness in a way that's entirely necessary, because we've got to look at the details, right? The devil's in the details. So as I've studied your work, I'm thinking, you could tell me if I'm wrong here, but I'm thinking that, especially when you started getting into geometry, that there's something metaphysical underlying here that has to do with more. It's like a technology of some kind, more geometry and number than it really is. And maybe that might even be a limited understanding to us, but that's a deeper way to see it, right?
It's even right now, I'm having a difficult time comprehending the actual understanding or meaning of this.
Right.
Because look, we have 10 fingers, right? We have 10. And the Sumerians started with the base 10 system. And then from there, they went from the base 10 to the base 60. And so the Sumerian numbering systems is 6, 60, 600, and then 3,600. All right, so these are the main divisions of the Sumerian numbering system that they use, the bases that they used in numbering. And those numbers basically describe creation. creation is not perfect. So when you get these numbers, these are like perfect sacred geometry numbers, like a cube or a tetrahedron. They're perfect angled numbers. But then when you get into, let's say, like the scale of the earth and the moon and the sun, like we just had an eclipse, right? The moon is the perfect distance, has the perfect proportions in relation to the earth, that from our perspective, they seem to be the exact same size. Even though the sun is 93 million miles away. And it's 400 times larger. But it lines up so perfectly that we say, well, how can this be a coincidence? How does this work exactly? It's too perfect. And what these numbers also show is there's a perfection here. There's a perfection between the earth, the moon, and the sun. And this was known by the Sumerians and passed down since the Sumerians. It could have been much earlier. We don't know where this information really comes from, how long the human race has had this information, but we have records that the Sumerians knew about it. And they documented it in that precise sacred geometry mathematical way. And they learned through numbers, and numbers are completely universal. We have, you could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 10. And this is a way of communication. If you don't have communication, you could count with numbers. You can show something with measure. So I think this is a very advanced system that we have. And the biggest question that comes from this is this an intelligent design? Because everybody, not everybody, but in the past, mystics have contemplated the idea of an architect or a great creator that created the earth and the heavens. And, when you start to see the numbers line up and start to understand the perfection between the sun, the earth, and the moon, and how it creates life, creates the cycle of life here, it's hard to ignore that this can just be a random occurrence, a random perfection in the universe, that everything has to be so specifically correct that we will live here, that we will have biodiversity and life. And it has to do with the moon. If the moon was off, or we were a little further from the sun, we'd be dead. There's no surviving this. Yeah,
it's definitely implications of a creator, right? Or some form of created technology, or a creator or something, right? I mean, it definitely is. And so I've talked to people that have read your book. I talked to Gigi, who also does a show on this network. He was on here Friday, and I listened to that show too. So, and in our community, most of us, we feel like that this place was seeded by some kind of ancient race, which still may be the truth. It looks that way. And then I had, for a few weeks, we've been going to what happens after we die, the whole delight is a trick kind of thing. So we've been digging into the deepness of these stories. But I think you're tapped into something that's a little bit more leaning towards the truth, right? And I say that because it has more to do with something that seems more reasonable to me. And I hope that's not just the left side of my brain talking, but number and geometry seem to show more truth that what you've shown us is that all kinds of stories can come out of, right?
And, when we take everything away, it comes down to these two elements of creation that can be defined as the circle and the square, or the sphere or the cube. And we know from Freemasonry and secret societies and all these things, that's basically their symbol, is the circle and the square. And it's been passed down for so long. Where did this information come from? Because the sphere and the circle, or sorry, the sphere and the cube, when you look at their geometry, they both equal 360 degrees. So this is it's a very interesting mathematical thing. And using the geometries, using the numbers, we're trying to define creation itself. So it's a little difficult to get into because there's a lot of numbers.
Sure,
to
yeah.
go through. But the whole point of it is that it's not one-sided. It's not like saying this number represents this one thing. It's this one number represents a fractal of creation that you can find in many places. So it really opens up this whole subject into new areas, I believe. And it also relates to the other book that I wrote, the Astral Genesis book, which that was the key to the opening up this language. And I call it a language because I have no other way of defining what this is. And basically, it's a hidden language of numbers and geometry that are hidden side by side with stories, with artifacts, with architecture, paintings, that tell a very unique story. So, when you're looking at an ancient artifact, which, I break down many in both Astral Genesis and Gates of the Anunnaki, when you break down these artifacts or these hieroglyphs or wall reliefs, they tell a story based on their angles, based on their geometry, and then what they represent. So like in Astral Genesis, you'll have let's say a picture of a sun god. And then you measure the sun god and you realize that the whole picture of the sun god is created on an angle of 15 degrees, 30 degrees, and 23.5 degrees, which are all numbers related to the movement of the sun in the heavens. So it's like, not only are they showing you a picture and saying this is the sun god, but if you measure it, all the angles that create the image itself are telling the story of the sun's path in the heavens.
Wow,
so it's like an encyclopedia of information hidden within the image itself. And I don't know anybody that's caught on to this. And so that was the basis of Astral Genesis, is trying to decode the underlying geometry, the underlying angles of these images. And then when we get into Gates of the Anunnaki, we're going further back into Sumerian times, Akkadian times, Babylonian times, and we're seeing the formation of this knowledge into the artifacts, into the tablets, into the architecture. And it's telling a story that I'm trying to piece together as best as I can, because if what I have found is correct, which I found hundreds of examples of, it tells me that there is this secret knowledge or a secret understanding of creation and reality that has been passed down since the Sumerians and probably before the Sumerians, that it's so advanced that you would have to be read into it. You'd have to be initiated and taught this language and taught how to transfer this information to future generations. Into story, right? Into religion, maybe even into texts, or yeah. And everybody is so separated. My religion is better than yours. My God is better than yours type understanding. And when you really dissect these sacred texts all the way to the New Testament, and going back to the earliest texts that we know of, like the Descent of Inanna. And you will find the same stories, the same motifs, the same knowledge being repeated. So it's a different story, but it has the same things in it. In fact, the Descent of Inanna, which is at least 4,000 to 5,000 years old, so predates the Bible by thousands of years. And I think it's the first story that mentions the apple tree and the serpent.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
And so that's the earliest motif I can find where it talks about this. And it talks about it in a very interesting way. Basically, Inanna comes out of the underworld. She was down there, tricked to basically go down and stay in the underworld. And she finally gets out, but she has to be replaced. So for her to come out back to the world, and many people know Inanna as Ishtar. It's easier to know Ishtar. But so she comes out of the underworld, and demons come with her to take another person in to replace her in the underworld. And she comes to find her husband, the king, sitting on his throne under an apple tree. And she tells the demons to take him to the underworld instead of her.
Sounds
and
about right.
he calls out to his brother Utu, which is the sun god, and begs him to transform him into a serpent so that he could evade capture from the demons, right? So Utu does change him into a serpent, and he was eventually caught and taken. But then his sister, out of remorse, says, I'll go down in his place for 6 months, and he'll come out for 6 months, and going back and forth through the underworld. And this has the theme of spring and summer, or winter and summer. So when they go down into the underworld, all life dies. And that's the first theme with the apple tree, because he's there to basically protect the apple tree as the serpent, a symbol of fertility. And that when they're taking him down to the underworld, basically that it's the fall.
Right. I get that.
So it's an early adaptation of the cycles, and it's the same exact story of Persephone. Sorry for my pronunciation, but it's the Roman goddess
Persephone,
who's taken down to the underworld by Hades. And when she goes down, because they're the goddesses of fertility and agriculture, so when they go down to the underworld, everything stops growing. So there's a problem. Zeus says this can't be. She has to come out for 6 months, and then you could have her for 6 months, so that the world doesn't die. So that's a Roman story. That's like 3,000 to 4,000 years after the descent of Inanna, but it's the same story. Just
do you think this is consciously done? What I mean is do you think this is consciously done by someone, or is it secret societies, or could it be that these things are so inherent in reality that we could even unconsciously, just by, I don't know, making things, project the truth? I know this is kind of deep, but a lot of times people say, well, this is in Hollywood, this is in stories, and the same stuff's in religion, and there's some kind of, they sold their soul to the devil to get this, and yada, yada, yada. But sometimes I wonder if it's like this is so inherent in reality that when we do create, whether it's stories, art, whatever, it just comes out. Like the story comes out,
I would agree that there's a collective archetype. We all kind of do the same things, even if we're separated by time and space, basically. But when it comes to these specific stories, you can actually trace them as they make their way from text to text and how they evolve and change from culture to culture. So you can see the influence that, other cultures, let's say they come in and take over another society. That society will have their myths and their culture, and the new people that come in, they'll take on that and they'll kind of evolve it to their narrative. So they build off of those stories. And the reason why I've moved away from, let's say, the Zecharia Sitchin type understandings is that there's not one creation story from the Sumerians. There's many different variations of it. So how do you choose which is the one you want to focus on and which is the true one? Because you can see how those stories change and evolve from the first stories in Sumeria. Then they get changed when you get to the Assyrian Empire, and then they start to change again back into the Babylonian periods. And then from there, it's taken to the Old Testament. So, for example, there's a lot of stories in the Old Testament that mirror Babylonian and ancient Sumerian stories. For example, the Great Flood myth, it's identical to these earlier texts. They talk about the giants, the Nephilim, the fallen angels. These are all stories that originally came from Babylon, and then from Babylon to Assyria, and from Assyria back in time to Sumeria. In fact, Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the most famous story, basically, he is 2/3 God, 1/3 human. He's a giant, and he takes all the women for himself.
Yeah, I know that story. Yeah.
So it's like he is basically the archetype of the Nephilim that is found in Genesis. It's like they say there was giants in this day, and they came from the pre-flood, and some of them survived, and that is literally word for word what's described in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
So it's not like someone is just coming up with the same stories. There's a history of passing these stories down, and it's not that far away. Like Mesopotamia and the biblical lands and Egypt are side by side. It's not that far away from each other. We're talking about modern day Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Israel, Egypt. They're all connected to one another.
Yeah, at some point, though, something had to have became secret. And I was listening to some other shows that you did, and you brought up an interesting point. Like, so in the Bible, they talk about the Tower of Babel, right? Mm-hmm. And it makes you think, like, at some point, power, we know it's human nature that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts, that whole saying and stuff. But if everybody knows, like if everybody's speaking the same language, or everybody knows the same thing or whatever, then who's going to really have power? So at some point, some of this stuff had to have been made a mystery, I would think, right? Like, do you think there's something to that, like on a deeper level? That verse of, they built a tower or whatever, and then they had to knock it down and make everybody speak different languages and things like that.
It's multi-leveled, and it goes with the theme that it's basically another theme of the fall, like the Adam and Eve story, because you have, let's say, humans who now have gained knowledge, and with that knowledge, they're building their tower to heaven, basically. And by doing this, they have the power of the gods. And because of that, the gods are very worried. They come together and they say, we have to stop them from becoming like us. And so they come down and punish them, basically. They stop them from building the tower. They separate them. They change their languages so they can no longer have that ability. It's the same thing with the Garden of Eden story, where they eat of the fruit of knowledge, and now they know the world. They know of good and evil. And when God finds out, the first thing they think of is, now that they know and have knowledge, of course they're going to eat of the fruit of life and live forever and become gods like us. So because of that, we have to punish them, cast them out. This is the story of the fall. Same exact theme.
Okay.
But even in the book, I go into this whole Tower of Babel story where I really do believe that there was a universal language. It's very obvious to me right now that there was this knowledge, and it's the knowledge of heaven and earth. It's the number of knowledge, sacred geometry, the stars, the cycles, and the movements. This is very profound knowledge. And once we understand that, we take control of our reality. This is when we start to understand when to plant, when to harvest, where to move on the planet Earth, where to build. It's a very ancient science and knowledge. And this knowledge is so advanced that I really believe that it was taken for the power, or the people in control. And it was only held for the initiative in secret societies. So it was slowly taught and passed down to those that were initiated into those orders. And that's why we still have this knowledge today. But publicly, this is not available information.
Yeah, because like a long time ago, it was the priestcraft that ran things. In order to be, especially in old Egypt, in order for you to be an Egyptian king, you'd have to know like theurgy and alchemy and stuff. Like, I don't know if that's what they called it then, but you had to know the mysteries. You had to go through their spiritual teaching and all this stuff and understand more than what your flock did, which is why they had the crook and everything, because they knew more. But somewhere along the line, yeah, I would think it was when the library got burnt down that they were like, look at all this knowledge, man. We could take this stuff for ourselves, and power just started corrupting absolutely, as they say, even worse.
And, that's why we find ourselves in the position we're in today. And this is why I write, and this is why I speak, because, it's like 6,000 years of broken telephone. We just don't have the right information. And because we don't have the right information, we have a distortion of reality. And because of that distortion of reality, the mass public, the populations of the earth, are kept in complete and utter ignorance. And because of this, they're so easy to control and manipulate. And like you said, true. With the priestcraft, the words in these texts are used, I hope I don't offend anybody, but this is history. It's used to control people in the worst ways possible, to wipe out other groups, or, they put themselves as the intermediary between you and God.
Yeah.
And it was only through what they said, and you had to obey them and their orders, for you to be accepted into, let's say, the kingdom of God. And that is a fundamental inversion of reality, because that kingdom is within you. And that's actually a quote from the Bible itself. It's in you. You are it. And it's, this is why
it's a stupid illusion if you think about it, right? Because when you wake up to it, you're like, well, you start realizing how powerful everybody is as individuals. And then if they actually believe that, well, no, we're codependent on other things spiritually and creatively and all this other stuff, it starts to become very scary, because these people not only don't know that their own powers and what they're capable of, and I don't mean like evil power, but, you know, spiritual power, then yeah, it becomes a scary place, because like you said, the information isn't fully there. It's not all the way out, even though we're getting closer to it. And I think you're helping us do that. But then we're still bombarded with a lot of confusion. You know, like I said, I've got a listener who's on the edges of the ends of his life, and he's reading all this information, and a lot of these stories, frankly, scare the hell out of him. You know, but when you look at the underlying sacred geometry and the number and the power of things, and it's in you, then it kind of makes it less scary. You know, because you're in control of more than you think you are. You know.
Yes, and the thing is that with secret societies, it's all about the initiations and giving keys, right? So let's say you're given the key to some certain knowledge. The knowledge is already there, all right? So let's say you have the Bible or a book, and you read this whole thing, and you think you know what you read. You think you know the story. And then someone comes along and says, okay, now apply this knowledge and read it again. And then you read it again, it's completely different.
Yeah.
Your perception has completely changed, and it's altered the way it's altered the information in the book. And so, you know, when you're dealing with people that just read the literal word and they don't understand, and they get very scared of this, the first reaction is they think that you're trying to go against a word, or you're trying to say something different that's in the Bible, you know? And I'm trying to show, just even quoting the Bible or a different text, I'm trying to show you that the original authors put this in there.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't write this. They wrote this. Yeah,
they put the riddle of the Sphinx in there. Right. So I don't know why that wouldn't be in there if we're not supposed to figure out what it means. Why would anybody, and I've always said this to people too, Jason, why would anybody put puzzles into a story for you not to figure it out? Like, I mean, there's some literal puzzles in there that if you have any common sense, are supposed to look at that and go, that doesn't even make literal sense. I need to figure out, like, what's the ox, the lion, the bull, and the man, right? Or the bull, the eagle, the lion, and the man. What does that even mean? You know, you're supposed to try to figure it out.
The issue is that you could spend your lifetime doing this, or lifetimes doing this, because there's so much information. Like, even just dissecting the birth of Jesus, you know, it is so symbolic. There's so many things in there that open up rabbit holes of astronomical alignments, and it's just too much. And when you really start to put the pieces together, it just completely blows your mind. You know, like you know, the Virgin Mary. You know, that's Virgo. It's the house of bread. There's so much. It's the baptism of Jesus. It's, you know, he's the fish. They call it Jesus the fish, because, you know, Pisces, right, we're entering the age of. So there's all these things, and I just mentioned a few, but like I literally wrote like a whole chapter in the Egyptian book or the Egyptian Postures book, just specifically on the astrological code within that story. And even the past week, I've learned some new things that completely change that. Not really change it, but like just add a whole other level of even the words. You know, the word Mary. What's the root of the word Mary? Like, it comes from the word myrrh, which is, you know, water, like, or river. And you get into these two levels of baptism, which is coming in through the earth, which is the earth sign of Virgo, and then leaving at the spiritual birth of water in Pisces. Like there's this whole code that's written in the stars that they took this information and they cleverly wrote a story. Like they go, how do we put this information and change it into a story? So it's just crazy.
No, it's cool. It's actually really cool. I learned a lot of this through studying Hermetics and the Western mysteries of the Golden Dawn and stuff, right? Like people think it's all about magic and shooting fireballs out of your ass and making stuff manifest, but it's not that at all. It's learning the mysteries of all this stuff, and then as you learn, you progress through what Hermes called the sun, or the sun, the moon, and the stars, or the earth, the moon, and the sun, or the earth, moon, and sun, and stars. That's the whole progression of the mysteries. And even that stuff has things hidden inside of it. And when you really dig, it starts tripping me out. And I know you understand what I'm saying. We're going to have to take a break here, but it starts tripping me out when you see the geometry and the numerology of things. And I think there's a lot of people that are talking about sacred geometry and a lot of people talking about numerology, but being able to put all this stuff together, the stories, the characters in the stories, the architecture, the names of these people, what they mean, the etymology and all of this stuff, and then put it in a line and say, it's all saying the same thing, is really what we're trying, it's the same thing, but different things, right? But is what we're trying to wake up to. And our brains are trying to comprehend. Oh, someone can tell me a story and it has 7 different meanings inside of it, and they're all true. How's that possible, right? Our brains need to comprehend that,
And the more I know and the deeper I get with this information, it's whoever put this stuff together originally, they're just on another level. Like I cannot comprehend the genius that it took, or the years of study and knowledge to then take that and put it in these type of texts.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's really insane.
I want to ask you some questions about that too. You guys go check out Jason's book. His website is thecrystalsun.com. Grab this book. I mean, you should have all of Jason's books if you're following this thing for sure, but grab his book, check it out. We'll be right back with Jason Quitt. If you got any questions, drop them in the chat, and we may open the phone lines up too here just shortly. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
For a slight additional fee.
Do you want to know the truth? Are UFOs real? Are aliens visiting Earth? Are governments around the world hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO Seekers, official partner of The Fringe FM, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Join us as we investigate locations like Area 51 by subscribing on YouTube at youtube.com/UFO Seekers.
Bumper stickers are a fun side hustle with low-cost investment that has built-in advertising to attract local customers in parking lots, rallies, gatherings, conventions, venues, and more. You could potentially sell these bumper stickers on consignment to local businesses, tattoo parlors, head shops, or any other independently owned store that might gear toward the fringe. Bumper stickers are great gift-giving ideas for friends and family. Also, a way to wake up your fellow travelers on the path without having to waste energy in tiresome debates. No car? No problem. Bumper stickers will stick to just about anything with a semi-smooth surface. Go to www.justbsme.com and get your bumper stickers today.
The Fringe FM isn't just a radio station. We also provide services for all your audio production needs. If you're interested in live radio or pre-recorded podcasts, we're here to help. We even do audio enhancements and voiceovers if needed. If you want to do a podcast or live radio show and even want the option to syndicate on terrestrial radio, from simple audio file enhancement to live production and call screening, we have you covered. We have worked with some of the best professionals in the business in order to provide coaching instruction for content creation, show structure, and more. Contact The Fringe Digital Media for more at info@thefringe.fm. That's info@thefringe.fm. Or call 501-777-5631 for a consultation.
Stay tuned for more right after this.
Have you ever wondered, what do the stars say for me? Or, will the next month or the next year be more favorable? How about, are our two signs compatible? Each month at the new moon, you can ask these questions live with me, your astrologer psychic, Mary DeCina, along with host of Lighting the Void, Joe Root. Join us at the new moon for Cosmic Conditions. We look forward to working with your energy.
Every new moon at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on Fringe FM.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
Lean forward slightly. Look straight at the speaker. And listen with a sparkle in your eye, as though you might be thinking,
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio.
All right. So we're back here with Jason Quitt. His new book, Gates of the Anunnaki. Go check it out, thecrystalsun.com. Guys, we need your support. We can't have the same, we're leaning on the same people supporting. By the way, thanks for the $5 sticker there, Hound Dog. Big shout out to you, brother. So Jason Quitt's here with us. Here's the thing about this book. You can tell by this interview, and I've watched the other interviews, that this book is so packed full of information that you're going to have to read it from start to finish. And it's because Jason kind of reveals this whole pattern and code and what's happening throughout the whole book. You got to read it from start to finish. Like, we can't do picture books anymore, even though it'd be nice to be able to flip through picture books and understand the whole universe. But this is some really cool stuff. From talking to Gigi already and everybody that's told me about the book, you need to grab it. And we'll probably, I'm betting you, yeah, there's a picture of some of the
pictures.
stuff.
Yeah, there's lots of pictures.
So I should have asked, I should have gotten the book before I did the interview, but I really just wanted to talk to you about it because I got excited when I heard you on Gigi's show. And because I'm a big Hermeticist, dude, like when I see things, it's not like I'm trying to validate Hermeticism and say this is reality, but when I see everything coming together, right, through people that I know that are bringing this information out, I want to know about it, right? Like, so the tree of life inside the flower of life, things like vortex math, that stuff is on the table now. And there's even actors in Hollywood saying, oh, all our math and science is wrong. And it's all over YouTube now. So I think I'm kind of excited about this stuff coming out, actually, is what I'm saying. So what do you think about that? Do you think we've got this whole thing wrong, even possibly mathematically and scientifically? I think we do. On a math level.
I think that we've come a long way, but if we continue to survive for another couple hundred years, I'm sure we will look back at this time as we're off track. So we'll always find new things, but I don't know the future.
Yeah, right on. Tesla was on to something, though. I think Tesla knew the future. I do. I think he saw into it or something, man. Like
Tesla is actually like one of my huge heroes. I love Tesla and everything he did. And, he, him saying the key to the universe is 3, 6, and 9. He's really revealing some things just with that statement.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the keys that opens up this numerology language, which, I just want to say, a lot of this stuff is very difficult to explain on the radio. I have, like, in the books, there's a lot of graphs, there's a lot of pictures to show what I'm talking about. So it's difficult to elaborate with words what this actually means. But Tesla was really onto something. And even Tesla back then, he said that even we didn't even understand electromagnetism. He said we were wrong about that.
Damn.
So we're still using electromagnetism based on things that are 100 plus years old, that even Tesla said 100 years ago was wrong. And we were not using it correctly. So if we, for example, knew what Tesla actually was talking about, we may have a completely different technological world and a completely different understanding. But I think they do know it and they do understand it, but they kept it out of public domain so that those technologies would not be accessible to us at this time.
The real trippy question here is did the Babylonians know vortex math? That's what I was thinking when I heard your other interview. Like, I was thinking, did they know like vortex math? Because we don't want to get away from the idea that, I know it's hard for us to get away from the idea that we were seeded by aliens, quote aliens, but I don't think we even understand all of that just yet. I think we were definitely, like, does this show, like, it definitely shows a created world. When you look at Darwin and evolution, based on your research, does it show this more or less? I mean, that's a deep, tough question, but I think Darwin is full of shit, honestly, especially about the natural selection. I really do. I think he's full of shit.
I think I'm biased because I'm human.
Could be. I could be being biased too, but
the thing is that we have these numbers within the human body as well. So the human body has this numbering system of proportions and sacred geometry. And the earth has it, the moon has it, the sun has it, the stars have it from our perspective, right? So how can this be a coincidence? And the only thing I can think of is, what if we are bound by mathematical laws? So that we're in this dimension, in this reality, on planet Earth, to survive, we have to follow a very specific resonance, a vibration, just to inhabit this space.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, so we're talking about, let's say, like aliens from another world.
Right.
They can come here and, if this is a different atmosphere, different vibration than theirs, different gravity, different everything, they may come here and just melt. We don't know these things.
Yeah.
So we're designed a very specific way for our environment. So the environment itself dictates what type of life can exist within that sphere of reality. So is that why we've come to these numbers? Is that why we've created these systems that measure these things and could relate and talk about how everything is connected? Maybe it's only connected from our perspective on Earth. Maybe once you leave the Earth, Sun, and the Moon, it's a completely different system. You know,
maybe, yeah.
You know, what if you're born and you only have like 2 fingers and 2 toes, one, you know, I don't know how.
Yeah.
It's just a completely different biology, completely different atmosphere, completely different suns and stars. You may have a completely different resonant understanding of numbers in the universe, because that's the only thing that matters to you and your survival in your life. So it's a very deep question. Again, I don't have the full understanding or answer to.
No, I get that. But from our perspective, infinitely and finitely, or even if we look at only from our perspective, infinitely and finitely, when we look at the sun and the moon and how it all lines up, or we look at the center of a rose, and we're basically seeing the golden ratio spiral out. We're seeing all the mathematics and fractals inside of that flower. We're also seeing the masculine in the stem and the feminine and the yoni in the flower, right? We could just trace it all the way down to zero and watch consciousness explode, but we can't see behind it, right? We can't see behind it at all, you know?
And again, the circle is a universal concept. The sun is a sphere. You know, the planets are a sphere. So we have this kind of constant mathematical understanding. And again, when you take that sphere or that circle, make it 2 dimensions, and you take the 2 like a dividing cell, and you create the Vesica Pisces, just the act, that is literally the first act of creation. It's this separation of this 1 becoming 2. Mm-hmm. And all these mathematical numbers come out of that division of 2 circles. And in the book, I show how you can actually create the 51.84 degree triangle, which is the math of the pyramid, just from the 2 circles of the Vesica Pisces. And so we say this is the first act of creation is the division of the 2 circles, and it creates the triangle of the 51.84 degree triangle. So when you just know that, just the basis of this, I would say that is universal. It doesn't matter what planet you're on. You take 2 circles and divide it, you get 51.8 degrees. All right, based on whatever numbering system that you put, it'll be the same triangle. The builders of the pyramid. Now, if we take the date, the historical date of the pyramid that we're taught in school, which is about 4,500 years ago, and then we would say that whoever built the pyramid or designed the pyramid, they knew about the Vesica Pisces. They knew about the division of the circle, because that creates the 51.84 degree pyramid. So who taught math? Who taught math? Who thought it was important enough to teach math as a language as far back as before the pyramids? Because we find these same numbers going back to Sumeria again, and it's the same numbers of the flower of life, same numbers of the Platonic solids, and those numbers are then mirrored in physical creation. It's mirrored in the physical body. It's mirrored in the architecture, like I said, of the pyramid and in other structures. But it's also mirrored in the dimensions of the earth. It's in the dimensions of the moon. It's in the dimensions of the sun. It's also in the orbits, the distances in the orbits between the planets.
And in the human body as well, too, right? Yeah. Everything is
those numbers are there. And they're very specific numbers. And like I said earlier, it's not 100% perfect. There are some instances where it is actually 100% perfect, but when you look at the purest form of mathematics of, let's say, the Platonic solids and the angles, and then you look at the scale or the size of the Earth and the Moon and the Sun, it's like 99.99% accurate to the number. You know, it's not 80% or 70% close. It's 99.9% accurate.
And that 0.0000 something that's left over could probably be just what consciousness is. You know, who knows, man? You know,
right. So we have, let's say, like we can say the perfection of God, which is like the perfect number that could be defined as geometry. So let's say like the perfect tetrahedron has, you know, very specific angles, goes to 720 degrees. So it's very specific geometry. And then let's say you come into creation and it's not 720 degrees, it might be 721 degrees. You know, so you might be off by that one, but it's still so close. Like, how do you say this is by chance or coincidence?
So then that, you know, we're talking to a lot of different communities here on this show. So if I asked you, Jason, based on your research with this, would it seem to describe an actual created simulation? A simulation is a whole other concept, but it could be a program of some sort that we just don't understand, right?
Again, you know, these are words that we're using because we're familiar with a simulation, because we're on a simulation right now using the computer. What I would say is that there is some type of laws or intelligent design that exist. How they exist and why they exist, that is the question. Because clearly it does exist. We find it in everything. We find it in life. We find it in form and structure. And, you know, we could even see it in the mineral world, how crystals grow. You can look at a pyrite crystal. It grows in a perfect cubic form. Nature is amazing, but it follows this fundamental law that cannot be denied. So what do we call it? Do we call it a simulation? Do we call it a created reality? Do we call it, you know, a higher being created this? I think the closest truth that we can find is through dimensions. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is that as a third dimensional reality, is what we call it, is a third dimensional reality, that there is a higher level or a higher dimension above us that we may be the shadow of, that we cannot experience because we are in the third dimension, but there is a fourth dimension and a fifth dimension and something above that, that basically is the blueprint or structure that is creating this reality, or we are the shadow of this or of that reality. So, all right, then this is an even bigger question. We're just speculating here. This is Roop and Quitt, right? Just speculating here. So then both of us have been out of body. Obviously, you've traveled more than I have, right? If you cymatic shows us that things are vibrated on it, you know, at certain vibrations, things make certain shapes, right? How things become dense and how they come together is a whole nother thing, but we know vibration makes certain shapes. And in the astral realm, there are all kinds of blueprints and vibrations and illusions and all kinds of things, right? Could the fourth dimension itself be that world? Even if it was, though, something is still making sure that this world is perfect, regardless of how elusive that world can be. There is this fundamental structure, and, you know, you can see it with a magnet, the electromagnetic torus field, or vortex math. It follows this kind of donut torus shape, which I think is the the fundamental geometry of this universal creation. It follows this donut torus shape, which again follows the two-dimensional flower of life, creates the platonic solids. What creates the boundaries? What creates the electrons, the photons? What creates this physical world to follow that geometry design? And where does that geometry design come from?
Exactly, yeah.
And again, I think that is the shadow of the fourth dimension. And that because we come from a higher dimension, we are strongly bonded to that fundamental reality. And that fundamental reality, like a vibration, like a sound, a mandala, holds that geometry in place. And the elements of creation not only are attracted to it, but they're bound to it. They're bound to that torus field. It's in everything. And then, well, what's above that? I don't know. How can we see it? I don't know.
I don't either. I have a theory that the conscious exploration could help us see it, but I don't think we're going to be able to see it with our five senses, right? Like, not in that sense. I feel like, I know this sounds wackadoo, man, but I feel like all of us should be doing everything possible in the world to start getting out of body, right? To like learn our spiritual nature. And a lot of people are still just afraid of it, but I don't think we're going to get any hardcore answers until we get to that. I know some people think it was seeded by aliens, but what if aliens are just astral beings that understand this, right? Like, we don't know that. We don't know. And I could be wrong, but at least we tried, man, because I don't think we're going to find the answers here to that question, even though everything is so fascinating,
See, I got my start there. So it's like having these out-of-body experiences led me on this path of research and discovery. Our thoughts, what we believe, do influence that. So, when you go out of body and, you'll see aliens out of your body,
yeah.
You'll see weird stuff, a lot of entities, a lot of weird things. And because of what we're taught or not taught, we kind of create what that reality is from our perspective, which changes as we evolve, which changes as we get more information. So, I look at it and I could just kind of simplify it, is that, and this goes back to mysticism and all these things, is that we have two births or two baptisms. And we're first spirit. We come from, let's say, the cosmic ocean of spirit, which is the dark waters in mysticism, the void. And you come into the physical body, and you're basically bound within the physical body. And you're birthed through the waters, and the womb is made out of salt water. You come out of the womb, you breathe your air, and it just locks the spirit within the body. Now, the spirit is asleep. This is what many people, don't understand, is that the spirit goes to sleep. It's like goes into hibernation when it enters the physical body. And then you live your life, and then at the age of 30, this is when you reach your peak. Okay.
Oh man, it's over, man. Okay.
Right. So when you're in your 30s, you reach your absolute peak of perfection, and then the body starts to go downhill slowly, but it does. That's where we're at. But at the age of 30, that's when your spirit starts to awaken again.
Yeah.
So your spirit starts to come out of its slumber around your 30s. This is why in the Bible, when did Jesus get baptized?
At 33. It was at 33.
No, he got baptized when he was 30. He died when he was 33.
Yeah.
Right. He got baptized when he was 30. And,
but they talk about the two baptisms in there too, of both water and fire,
Yes. Yes. And what I'm trying to say is that the out of body experience is that baptism of fire. All right. It's the leaving of the physical form after the spirit is awakened. And so when every person is going to have an out of body experience when they die, every single person. That's how it works. So your spirit awakens, the physical body dies, you go back to the world of spirit. Now, what we're talking about when you say everybody has to leave their body and figure it out.
Yeah, did I sound like that when I did sound like that when I said it, didn't I? Yeah. Just figure it out.
The thing is that it's you basically have to die to leave your body.
Yeah.
It is a form of death, and that's why it's like the second baptism. So what you're doing is you're forcing an awakening of the spirit again to be conscious, and then to have, just like the shaman or the masters, you're going to have one foot in one world and one foot in the other world, and you're going to be the bridge or the portal between the worlds. That's a lot for a person that is not properly initiated into it. Or I would say that if you're not fully grounded and you have no clue what you're doing, it could be quite a hell ride. You're
scaring me, man. You're scaring me. But I hear you. What you just said makes a lot of sense, because for the first out of body experience that I had, I did have to relax to a point of, it felt like death. Like the body doesn't work anymore. You have to get to that point where you vibrate and your body shuts off. Yeah. And it scares some people. I got excited, but now that you put it that way, it is pretty much like the body does have to die for you to be out of the body, in a sense,
And the mind freaks out. Yeah. The mind freaks out because you don't know if you're going to come back. That's the way I felt when the first couple times is the mind is basically shattered, because it's almost like you're going through the process of death while you're still alive. And there's been a lot of initiations going back to, I don't know about Samaria, but I know definitely in Egypt that, they'd place you in the pyramids or place you in the sarcophagus, and they go through the ritualistic death and resurrection. Mm-hmm. Or they could even give you specific plant medicines, for example, to kind of push you out. And sometimes these plant medicines are very strong, where you have no control. You cannot stop the process from happening. You just have to go along with it. And a lot of people really freak out because they can't stop the process of leaving the body.
Yeah, you can't make it go away. Yeah, I get that.
And
have you done that?
There are
people.
people.
Have you done that?
And, what's that?
Have you done ayahuasca?
Yes.
Really? Okay. I didn't know that, actually. I don't think.
I don't talk about it too much, but when I first started to leave my body, I really got into Terence McKenna.
All right.
I started to talk about my out-of-body experiences, and someone came to me. He's like, "Man, you got to read Terence McKenna." So I read all about it, and I couldn't believe that you can have these experiences by, let's say, taking mushrooms or taking ayahuasca. So I'm like, okay, let's give that a try. Right. This is like 20 years ago. Yeah. But it's different. That's all I could say. It's different. Doing it naturally and doing it with medicine, for me, is two completely different. I think they're both valid experiences, but for me, they're separate. They're different experiences.
Okay. Because I've never done, I've done DMT, but I didn't get out of body. But I did, it kind of goes back to what you're saying about the Bible and these texts. There's verses, not just in the Bible, but most people know the Bible, so I'm going to bring it up, that say, I saw this vision, but whether I was in the body, and they say it specifically, whether I was in the body or out of the body, I don't remember, you know.
This is very well known.
Other level.
I mean,
of
if you go back to like Egyptian texts, I mean, there is stories written about people having conversations with their soul. There's stories about, you know, them entering the underworld while they're still alive. There, even Plato wrote a whole story about the person that came back from a near-death experience, you know, and talked about their out-of-body experience. So this is very well known back then. It is written in these stories, and a lot of them are visions. A lot of them are like even angels. Like a lot of the stories of angels basically come when you're sleeping, just like an alien abduction type of thing. But then there's stories where they come and you serve them dinner. You know?
Yeah, the God showed up to my house and I fed them, and yeah, I get what you're saying.
So you have both types of stories. And people get angry with me. Like, I'm not going to lie. People get upset with me, especially in the UFO community, because I've had experiences with what people would describe as gray aliens, reptilians, mantids, you know, the very stereotypical aliens that people talk about. But they all occurred sleeping in an out-of-body state.
Right.
You know, and then people will say, oh, well, you know, they're just kind of wiping your memories or doing something weird. And I said, no, it's like you learn and train yourself to leave your body. And in that next world, in that other world, they're right there. Or some of them are right there. Sometimes you have interactions with them. I'm not discounting the fact that people may see UFOs in the sky, or an alien may come out of a UFO and greet somebody physically. What I'm saying is that the physical experiences are probably extremely rare, whereas the spiritual experiences of the out-of-body connection to these things is probably 90 to 95% the spiritual side, the other dimensional side, whereas maybe 5 to 10% is a physical interaction with an experience.
Well, just to back you up on that, even Whitley Strieber, when he came on here, told me that, because he went to the Monroe Institute and learned about he got into exploring consciousness more, went to the Monroe Institute and realized, he even said, I think that looking back on it now, the experience I had when I wrote Communion I could have tapped into some kind of interdimensional thing or out of body state, you know, to have seen or interacted with these beings. You know, a lot of people do think the spaceship came in, they kidnapped you, and then they wiped your memory, and then they put you back in bed, you know. And it could just be that you were in another state that you're not aware of, you know.
And some people, they'll have these experiences completely awake during the daytime. And they'll see something or they'll communicate with something, and there'll be witnesses near them. And the witnesses don't see a thing.
That's so crazy to think about, man.
So how does this happen? The only way I could explain it is that we're multidimensional, and we can tap into other wavelengths of frequency that these things could inhabit, and we can be called into or resonated into that experience, even though no one around us can see it or witness it. And when it gets out of hand, you know, people would call it schizophrenia, basically. That's the medical term for it.
Hmm. So where do you think, with this new book, Gates of the Anunnaki, right, which we're all going to get and we're all going to read it from start to finish, I guess I go back to the question is do you think it's possible to find the answers to those big questions? Number one, that's a question I've never asked you, right? Because I get so many people to come on here and go, nah, you know, there's stuff you're never going to know anyways. It's just, we need to understand that it's fascinating. I don't like that. I like to know things, you know. I want to know, man, you know.
What I can clearly state is that this information opens up a whole other intelligence and knowledge about our past. We are so divided and separated that this information could bring us together into a knowledge that the human race did actually have thousands of years ago that we don't have anymore, or not acknowledged anymore. It offers a spiritual side, a metaphysical side of knowledge that we are connected to the earth, to the moon, to the sun, to the stars, and that information is encoded within the physical body itself. So it gives us this kind of connection. You know, everybody's looking for a connection to the source or to God, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, to nature.
Right.
And this is not an abstract concept. Like, if you just believe it, it will be true. This is not what I'm discussing at all. What I'm discussing is there's physical, tangible knowledge and evidence that exists, that once you understand it, you can see that you are completely connected to a system. You are part of this network, this system, this resonance, whatever you want to call it. And that it basically proves, in my mind, it proves this mystical spiritual connection that we're bound by certain laws. But it goes way more deeper than that, because what this says and what this really means is that we are part of the whole. Our spirits, our souls, whatever you want to call the intelligence in another dimension, is eternal. It's part of this makeup, and it can navigate this makeup. And if we start to understand this, and this is, I think, the purpose of initiations and secret societies and all this stuff that was hidden, is that it brings you into this kind of connection where you start to understand your place in things, understand a side of you that I can call the God side of you. All right, we have our physical identities. So I'm Jason, you're Joe. You know, people are listening to this. We're all individual people with individual needs and responsibilities and paths in life. We're all individuals. But we also are connected to the same fabric of creation. And we're in a boundary in a body, but if we can dissolve that boundary, we can move the mind and consciousness into this kind of fabric of energy that extends out to everything. So I can dissolve the identity of Jason, which is quite scary to do. And by dissolving that, the energy leaves the body and it becomes part of the earth, or it becomes part of the sky, or it becomes, you know, it's very difficult to put words to describe what I'm talking about. But basically you realize that what we call God or source, or just nature itself, the other side of physical reality, we are that as well. We're not just Jason and Joe, we're also the cosmos and the universe experiencing itself, basically, in the simplest terms. But to experience that, I think that's what you're talking about, is everybody has to leave their body, but it goes beyond that.
Yeah, no, I know it goes way beyond that. I think that, like you were talking about, we can only understand perspectives inside of the reality that we're perceiving in, right? That's all that we can do. So in our bodies, we can only understand the perspectives inside that reality. as Joe or Jason or whatever, or that we're humans on the earth. We're inside that too. It's like a fractal thing, right? But when we go out of body, we start to get outside that small fractal. We could. This is why we take an etheric double with us into the astral realm, because we're still holding on to that consciousness of that, you know, that fractal of Joe or Jason, right?
What I would say is that our other self, I'm just putting this in words because I can't, it's the only way I can do it. We have an other self that is so foreign to us that we do not recognize it, and it's basically alien to us. But that is literally us as well. You know, so
it's a trippy thought.
It's very difficult to explain. Like, how do you say, you know, you leave your body and you see this thing that, you know, scares the crap out of you because you don't know what it is, but it's also you. You know, like, how do we integrate that? How do we, who do we even talk to about this? This is like, I'm talking to you about this. I can't even find the words.
You don't.
But there is no support system. There's no people that have traveled out that far to come back and say, here's the map. You know, this is what we've found. And I know they're trying to do that with DMT. They're trying to map the DMT universe, but
I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's possible because I think it's being co-created as you're experiencing it. I don't think it's possible, you know. I've talked to every conscious explorer that I know of that has been out pretty far, like you and Thomas Campbell and William Buellman, and I could think of some more, right? And there's, you know, the only thing that I know that, like William Buellman and a couple of other conscious explorers have said is that what I was just saying is this identity to our etheric body, we still have an individuality in this fractal thing, but as he kept traveling, he started letting go of his identity, and his arms went away and his legs went away, and then he just became like this ball of light, but yet he still had an individual identity. He was still in that kind of sphere, you know, and that just where he was could still just be a three-dimensional reality. Maybe that's as far as we can go before we can get to the fourth is a star, you know. I don't know, man. My point basically is we're not going to know without exploring it. And we may never find out, but we got a better chance not being afraid to explore ourselves consciously, you know.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, you need the fearless, because you're really going into the unknown. I mean, we're all going to go there someday, as we leave this body and earth, but to do it while you're alive, that takes a very interesting personality
well,
to want to explore that, because especially if you don't have any teachers, it's like now, look, we're the same age.
Yeah.
We're in our early 40s. I hope I didn't ruin that for anybody.
No.
But here's the thing is that when I was in my early 20s, I didn't have a care in the world. You know, if I would just leave my body and go explore, you know, that's a great Friday night, you know.
Yeah.
But now, you know, you're married, you got bills to pay, and you have to work, and it's like, if I want to go out and do some real exploring, I want to know that there's like a teacher or someone here to watch and monitor me. You know, I'm not that crazy kid anymore that just kind of says, okay, let's do it. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I'm not married. I'm probably going to be like that crazy kid until I'm old, man, you know, but you're a wiser being than I am. I'll give you that. It's just, I hope that you keep digging, man. Like, you got to keep writing. I say that to a few people. I talk to a lot of authors, and, you know, essentially people will either write about their experience or write about what they believe or explain research that's already happened and then put what they think, like this Wes Penry stuff, what they're trying to convince us because they have insiders or whatever, that is ultimate reality, right? You're not doing that, though. You know, you're not doing that. And that's what I love about this, is that you are actually showing us a reality that we're not seeing when it comes to this, I guess you could say, this Anunnaki thing, this Zachariah Stitchin. We all understand the stories are astrological and they taught us stuff and aliens seeded the earth and yada, yada. But we don't know that they put codes and geometrical instructions and all kinds of things in there. Nobody was seeing that, but you saw it, you know. And I don't think you would have seen that if you weren't a conscious explorer that did go out of your body and opened up your perspective, you know, is what I'm trying to say.
No, and thank you. I really appreciate that. And see, I have this whole philosophy. If you would have told me I would be a writer 20 years ago, I would have laughed, because I can't write for, you know. I watched in English class. When they said to read a book, I watched the movie. You know,
me too.
That's where I was in high school.
Or the audio book at the very least, you know.
Or Cole's Notes, whatever the small book was. So when I had this spiritual awakening, and I needed to know these things, I needed to learn for my own conscious survival. I had to find out certain things. And I bought every book I can, thinking that I could find the answer. And I would buy these books thinking that, okay, this person knows exactly the answer to my question. And I'll read it from cover to cover and be so disappointed that I didn't get what I wanted from the book. Mm. So the books that I write are basically the books that I can't find.
That makes sense, yeah.
You know, so growing up, I really wanted to know certain information, but I couldn't find it anywhere. So now that I'm older, what I'm doing is I'm writing the books that I couldn't find growing up. So hopefully it'll get into the hands of people that were in my position 20 years ago.
Well, yeah, okay. That makes sense. That totally makes sense. So when I read Revelations and I read the part about, they talked about the kingdom of heaven. Okay. So just to give you an example, they talked about the kingdom of heaven and they said that the walls were that length of a man, right? That had the length of the man, that of an angel. That meant something, right? Yeah. And then that the walls and it said the length and the breadth and the width of it were the same.
Yep.
So I started drawing this out and it was the Vitruvian Man. And then you put like a line around it and it comes out to like a pentagon, and that there's 12 walls and it's length, width, and height. Well, that's volume. So now you got a three-dimensional shape with 12 walls that are the sides of, you're back into the Pythagoras stuff here. This is a dodecahedron that Revelations is talking about. And then he's putting gemstones on each walls with each tribe, which corresponds with an astrological sign, you know? And then that stuff started like just coming
out the same exact numbers in Revelation are actually found in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And that's the numbers how to build the ark.
It's crazy, man. That's nuts. That is nuts. We got to decode this whole thing, you know. That's what, now you're going to spend the rest of your life decoding everything, right? Yeah. You tried? Well, we need to read this, man, because what do you think? Ultimately, if you had to narrow it down and say, look, what I'm trying to show you is this, even though you probably can't. What would you say?
What I'm trying to say is that,
yeah, you probably.
What I'm trying to say is that what we consider God, or the creator, or the architect of this physical creation that we know about, they have a fingerprint. All right, and it's this fingerprint that it's this. Sacred geometry numerical code. That's the fingerprint of the creator. And what these mystics did was they figured out this fingerprint that proved that God existed. or that there was an underlying design or structure to creation, which it would be translated into the fingerprint of God, basically. And what they did was, once they figured this out, they started to use it as the numbering system to define reality. And this is where we get the Sumerian numbers from, the cuneiform, the shars. This is the base 60 model of how to divide the heavens and divide time and space. It's based on this knowledge of this fingerprint of creation. And by knowing this fingerprint of creation, you go into resonance with the design of the creator. So all these numbers, like you have in Revelations, of the design of New Jerusalem is what you're talking about.
Right, yeah.
And the design of the Ark from Gilgamesh, and the design of heaven from the herds of Nana. These numbers represent a formula of creation that exposes the fingerprint of creation. And it's a geometry. So the last chapter of the book, I talk about the cube of creation, where a lot of these geometries that are being spoken about in ancient texts actually create a perfect cube. You know, and the cube is the element of earth. It's the element of creation. Right. It's the boundary. And then the Metatron's cube, you know, is the combination of all the platonic solids within the cube of the flower of life. And it's from this cube that basically they said God resides within this cube. You know, well, what does that mean? It means that the sacred geometry structure holds the mathematics of creation within that space. So you can commune with God, you can commune with different realities. Just like the Ark of the Covenant, you had communication with God. Because of the structure within it was a reflection or a space that contained this numerical reality of the fingerprint of God. That is basically my conclusion of the math that comes from these documents.
That's so cool, man. That really is cool, because I think that number one is going to psychologically help a lot of people that wonder if there's even a creator to begin with. And it is funny that in the Western mysteries, the one thing that when you sought out the mystery schools and the exoteric, was you had to believe in a creator. It didn't matter who that creator was. And I think it's because they knew it all led to the same fingerprint that you're talking about. It all led to the same thing, you know, which is why rituals and stories and plays and all the things that we go through kind of glorify this fingerprint, so to speak. You know what I mean?
I do. And like I said, it's part of this kind of fractal idea, or this fractal ideology, that as we start to really delve deep into this information, like you said, there might be 7 levels that are all true.
Right.
You know, so someone can tell me something that's completely different than my conclusions, and I'll agree with them because it's part of this kind of fractal of knowledge that can be dissected from this information. But I'm not creating new words. What I'll say.
Sure.
What I'm doing is I'm taking literal quotes with literal numbers and showing how they add up. You know,
that makes sense.
So it's not like I theorize that this is what they're talking about. No, I'm saying for example, you're talking about the astrological connection. Just look up the word bull of heaven, you know, which is Taurus, in the constellation Taurus. And the bull of heaven can be found in multiple texts going all the way back to Sumeria, to Egypt, to biblical texts. You know, so it's the same word meaning the same thing over thousands of years. So how they didn't just make it up, the bull of heaven. They literally knew exactly what they were talking about in those texts. It's us. We don't know what they're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
And then we think of ways of explaining it, but there is only one explanation. And the text tells you the information. It's not like you have to guess what it means. There are certain texts that literally tell you that the bull of heaven is Taurus. So I'm not theorizing. I'm showing you the text where it actually says it. And then you apply it to all the other texts, and then suddenly it makes perfect sense. And then you see it as an allegorical story, and then you start to realize that they're describing stars, like Gilgamesh is Orion. He plays the role of Orion in certain scenes of the Epic of Gilgamesh. So it's amazing. Once you have these keys and you put them in there, suddenly the story takes on a completely other context.
Very cool. Well, I mean, we've reached the end of the show, Jason, but I got a feeling when I read the book, I'm probably going to be begging to talk to you again, but hopefully if you haven't written another book by then. But I do want to go through this book like thoroughly, and I will, hopefully everybody in our audience will grab a copy. If you go to the Crystal Sun, I'm sure you got links to it there. Do you have any speaking events or anything coming up?
I am going to be at Contact in the Desert, which I'm going to be giving the first presentation of this new book there. You could also get this book off Amazon. It comes very quick. I think people get them in like a day or two from Amazon. It may take 2 weeks from me. But so I'll be at Contact in the Desert, and that is going to be fun. I'm going to really work on that presentation to make everybody, I'll make it very clear what this information provides.
Oh, you'll have pictures. Yeah. You won't be dealing with a host that hasn't read the book that doesn't have pictures,
They'll have lots and lots of pictures and lots of numbers. And when you do get the book, the most amazing thing is that when you take these numbers and you actually place them to scale, it creates a blueprint. And that blueprint is the most amazing thing you'll ever see. So just putting that out there, even though I'm leaving out the best part.
Right on, man. Yeah. Well, I hope you guys go check them out. If you're going to Contact in the Desert, go check that out too. Go to the website, grab the book. Thank you, Jason, for coming on. It was a real pleasure talking to you again, man. It always is. Always is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You guys, we'll be back next week. I'll be putting out some stuff this weekend too. You guys have sweet dreams. Night, night. Go get the book, thecrystalsun.com.